Many times we don't understand the law. Law for the People with Eric Cedillo is here to inform, educate, and answer your legal questions. Thank you for tuning in today. From the law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas, Texas. Here's your host, Eric Cedillo.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us this wonderful Friday afternoon. We've got an incredible show for you this afternoon. Invited some wonderful guests out. But before we get to that, the slight disclaimer here on Law for the People with your host, me, Eric Cedillo. As you guys know, we are transmitting from Dallas, Texas. So the things that we reference with respect to the law are usually about Texas law. So just kind of keep that in mind, because we've got some listeners from all over the place, right, Fern? Got some folks down in South America and Europe and all those great places. But again, when we speak about the law, we're usually talking about Texas law. So let's jump right into it. We've got a wonderful guest with us today. Our first guest is Mr. Philip Kingston, who is running for city council for, how many terms does this make, Philip?
This will be my fourth term.
Fourth term. And he's going to give us a little background on why he's running and what he's all about. So why don't we just start with that, Philip? We'll just talk about you and generally what you want to share with us.
Well, I'm running for my fourth term. My record has been one of providing excellent customer service to people when they call the office. People know Connie Sanchez, my longtime assistant, and we do a really good job on the day-to-day blocking and tackling of, this pothole is bothering me or whatever it is. The thing that I do that most of my colleagues do not do is legislate, and I take great pride in initiating legislative efforts on the City Council, and that's resulted in a lot of what I think are very important improvements in the way we manage the City of Dallas, including living wage for city employees and contractors, rest breaks for construction workers, most recently paid sick leave for any employee who works in the City of Dallas.
Okay.
Those are big, important initiatives that align with the policies that the council has adopted, such as reducing poverty and child poverty.
Okay.
Sick pay for low-wage workers directly affects child poverty because single parents trying to make ends meet on low wages need the ability to care for sick children without losing their jobs.
Right.
So these are things that are hugely popular,
Yeah.
and it's always a mystery to me why there's so much resistance from supposedly progressive members of the city council.
Right.
The mayor loves calling himself a progressive. I have yet to see a vote that would back that up.
Right.
So that's what I'm running to continue. I think an objective examination of my record is something that I can be very, very proud of, and I think it would convince people that I need 2 more years to complete that work.
Okay. Philip, sometimes on our show we have an opportunity to spend some time at length talking about the people, kind of getting a sense of where they're kind of coming from. And I think that's really important. There's a reason why you do what you do and the way in which you do it. So why don't you start from the start? Kind of give us an idea of where you grew up and what that was all about.
Well, I think, you and I probably have some similarities in that regard. You and your sister serve others, and I'm sure you got that from home.
Mother in particular.
Yeah, that's my story. It's the same thing. My parents were huge volunteers for local charities. My dad was the president of the San Antonio chapter of the Red Cross for a long time. My mom served on the library board and the state board for gifted and talented. And I mean, they really modeled that you have to help others with the work that you do.
Okay.
And I believe that on a professional level too. You and I are both lawyers, and I think that the law, when used properly, really does help people. It really does move toward the ends of justice, even if not perfect every time.
Yeah.
So I grew up doing that stuff, but I also really, really enjoyed municipal politics. A family friend of ours, who's my parents' age, got very interested in local politics in San Antonio, where I grew up, and I worked on all his campaigns. His kids didn't find that exciting or whatever, but I really did. Right. And so by the time I had gotten to college, he was running for mayor and ultimately was successful. That was Bill Thornton. And so I actually spent some time inside City Hall at San Antonio doing neighborhood work there. And then for a period of time, I made my living doing campaigns and elections with a consultant of his that was a very good friend of mine, who incidentally was also an advisor to current San Antonio Mayor Ron Nierenberg.
Okay.
So I've been blessed to kind of keep a foot in both cities politically. I maintain some good relationships with the San Antonio City Council, and I'm really like heartened and encouraged to see the progress in my old hometown, because it's it was a very poor city when I was growing up,
Right.
and it has really transformed itself in a lot of ways. Unfortunately, what that means is that it has now made Dallas the poorest big city in America.
How about that?
We now have the lowest median wages of any city over 1 million population.
Yeah. How is that? How is that possible, Philip?
It's the way we've governed ourselves. One of the issues is that Dallas is home to the fastest growing population of immigrants in Texas. And they are still majority Mexican, but more and more they're from farther south. As you know, the violence has driven those people up here. And we've done a very poor job of helping them find success in our economy. And it's been very well publicized that the way we do affordable housing has concentrated poverty, which deprives the people experiencing poverty of the opportunities that other people have. And it's really a failure of Dallas to understand what it is as a city. It's very easy for a person like you or me who has a professional degree to find excellent employment opportunities here. It's increasingly hard to find places to live that are affordable,
Right.
but you can get by. But it's easy to go out in uptown, work in downtown, hang out here on Lower Greenville where your office is,
Yeah.
and see nothing but prosperity. And the truth is that the average Dallasite is not a working middle class lawyer or doctor. The average Dallasite is someone who may be struggling with English as a second language, who may be looking to raise his or her employment prospects from like $9 an hour construction work to something semi-skilled at $15 an hour, simply so that they can make a life for themselves and their children.
Right.
And that's the more it's not that we have to sound the alarm or panic about the future of Dallas, but if we ignore the needs of the majority of the residents of Dallas, we are necessarily going to fail as a city.
Yeah. We're definitely going to get into that in the second part of the specific platforms and other things that you have a history on, what's important to you. Before we do that, I did not know that you were from San Antonio. I didn't know that you grew up in San Antonio. What did your folks do as you were growing up?
My dad is a CFO type. He managed the accounting and finances at several small businesses.
Okay.
For a long period of time, he was at a business called Mission Party Ice, which was a very old business in San Antonio. One of the ice plants that I actually worked at as a kid was over 100 years old, and made ice in a very outdated manner by freezing giant bars of ice, 300-pound bars of ice, in a brine mixture that was cooled by a compressed ammonia chiller, which frankly today I don't think OSHA would allow to operate. And then you pull the bars out of the chiller and you slide them across the floor, and then throw them in a crusher and bag up the crushed ice and all this. And all of those jobs were minimum wage. Most of the guys who worked there lived across the street at one of the oldest federal affordable housing projects in America, and one that has thankfully been redeveloped. We had injuries in that thing, and the ammonia chiller would leak, and we'd have to evacuate the factory. So fortunately, all those jobs have been replaced by machines. These are not jobs that anybody is sorry they lost, I hope. My mom was a teacher, and then she started a pretty successful educational consulting business where she did teacher in-service training for public schools all over Texas. And she still travels around Texas to train teachers.
So they're still with us, your folks.
And so that and I grew up on the north side of town, went to Clark High School. That's a really good academic school, and so it gave me a lot of opportunities. Was able to go to Trinity University for my undergrad and study economics while I was doing that campaign and election work on the municipal level.
Yeah.
Actually met the Castro brothers' mom back then. She was a very important political activist. You definitely needed her support if you wanted to be somebody in San Antonio.
Right.
Then I eventually wound up spending a little bit of time in D.C. working on the Hill on First Amendment issues before I came back and went to law school at Baylor.
So after your undergrad education, you went off to Washington. Very cool. Did you know Pete Torres by any chance?
I don't know
Pete Torres
Pete.
had run for. Pete was somebody. I actually went to St. Mary's.
You went to St. Mary's?
San
Cool.
Antonio, yeah. So we lived there for a couple of years after law school, and Pete, when I came out, gave me an opportunity to be housed in his office. Wonderful guy. He had run for mayor, I believe, in the '60s, maybe early '70s. He's since passed, but he was a wonderful lawyer there, and just a real trailblazer.
I clerked for a while at Davidson and Troilo, which is a real old San Antonio firm, and they were great. And they did all kinds of, I got some good exposure to litigation, which is what I wound up doing. But they also had a real robust practice in utility regulation.
Okay.
And is something that prepared me for city council work because we have so much interaction with utilities who are frankly trying to screw our ratepayers all the time.
Right. So let's kind of get a sense of where you see this developing for you, kind of growing up and into, the city council person that you are. It seems as though you're trying to back the little guy. Seems as though you're trying to help those who may not have the opportunity to really fight for themselves in a lot of ways. Where do you think you developed that in your journey?
I got to tell you, Eric, that's something I've learned since I got elected.
Okay.
When I ran in 2013, that was the culmination of a process of being more and more involved in historic preservation and in the management and rehabilitation of Greenville Avenue.
Okay.
Those were the very specific things I did. I helped create a conservation district in my neighborhood to stop the tearing down of these old houses, to try to preserve East Dallas. And that got me a lot of experience advocating at City Hall, in front of the Plan Commission, in front of the council. I worked very closely with Valletta Lill, who was my predecessor in this seat, who did her legacy of historic preservation is second to none.
Right.
And then, Greenville Avenue, you had a front row view of this. Between 2006 and 2009, it was a zoo down here. And I have a theory that the city actually started that ball rolling by not taking care of the public realm on the street. If you remember, the street itself and the pedestrian features, the sidewalks, were in terrible shape, and the city allowed graffiti to persist on Greenville Avenue. It just looked bad.
Right.
And it's hard to blame the private landlords for not maintaining their properties if the city isn't going to maintain the public realm in front of their properties. And so as the street kind of deteriorated, the tenants in these buildings operated worse and worse business models, and they drew in people that were creating violence on the street. And we had murders and lots of bar fights. People, after 2 a.m., they'd get let out into the street and there'd immediately be violence. Yeah. And we were spending like $500,000 in police overtime a year down here. I live 3 blocks from it, so I wasn't going to put up with that. My predecessor, Angela Hunt, wasn't going to put up with that, and she and Pauline Medrano, who shared the district at that point, put in place a planned development district that helped us control some of the late night use, and really has resulted, I think, in a beautiful rehabilitation of the street. It is really coming to life and is on an upward trajectory. Oh. So in 2011, I managed a coalition of 6 neighborhood associations down here to respond to the applications for specific use permits that these operators were making, mostly bars. And that process consumed about 100 hours of my time in 2011, which didn't make either Melissa or my boss at the time very happy. But what it showed me was that I had a passion for it. And when Angela was going to be term limited, I took a look at the other people who wanted to replace her, and I frankly didn't trust any of them to manage the really delicate land use questions we have in District 14 and in the city of Dallas. And that, that's what happens to people, I think, in any kind of public service role, is the more you get engaged in it, the more you realize that you have a stake in it and you feel invested in it. And I really felt like I had some success in Greenville Avenue, and I felt like I could translate that to the rest of the district. And I think my record is that I've shown that. But back to what you were talking about before, the necessity of backing the little guy in a city like Dallas is, in my case, just the result of learning about the issue. Like we said before, when you live on Lower Greenville and you work downtown, you're not necessarily interfacing with the average Dallas resident. And I'm a big believer in analyzing things on a systemic level, because the thing that the voters really want more than anything else is for us to manage the city in a sustainable way, right, in a way that doesn't waste their tax dollars, that does support the city services that they want, but that also gives everybody a chance to succeed. Because when you have these vast areas of concentrated poverty, the city is not succeeding no matter how well a small group of middle-class people is doing, right? And the city, pardon me, in the last 15 years has grown its recap areas, which are, areas of historic racial inequity and poverty. We've gone from 20 square miles to 40 square miles. Well, we don't think of ourselves as getting worse, but in many ways we really are. And particularly when you look at sort of the division between the haves and the have-nots. It's getting deeper, and we're not fixing it. Now, the housing policy that we've adopted and the economic development policy that I believe we will adopt before the end of the year are going to be effective in reversing that trend. They're not based on the hopes and dreams of progressive idiots. They're based on actual data. They're based on things that have worked in other places. Right. So it's not like we've ignored it, but we have put in place some things that will fix it. But it's, in terms of my awakening to that as a problem, what I saw was that it was Dallas's biggest threat. If we didn't address the needs of people who are in the most need, we were not ever going to be able to succeed as a city. Yeah. No matter how much Greenville Avenue stuff I do. Right.
And for our listeners who, again, can be from all over the world, quite honestly, but folks who may not know Dallas and just know of Dallas, of course they know a lot. I'm sure they learned from the television show in the late 70s and 80s. I grew up in Dallas. My great-grandparents came here a while back. My grandparents settled in West Dallas before, of course, it was West Dallas or incorporated in any way, right at the turn of the century. So it's been, of course, near and dear to my heart for a very long time. Something that I kind of wanted to get into in the second part of our segment, but I think is really important now, is something that has hit really close to home for me, was what's kind of happening in West Dallas. We know some things that were going on in the late 90s. There was an anticipation of growth into the West Dallas area. Some TIFs were created to incorporate West Dallas when the arena was being built. So we kind of could foreshadow the fact that some folks were going to be displaced in West Dallas. And of course, relatively recently that happened. And as people may not know, West Dallas is just kind of unique in the sense that those rents, although incredibly modest homes, some in really, some folks kind of living in abject poverty are paying $300, $400 in rent. You're not going to be able to find that anyplace else, of course, in the city of Dallas. But they were, entire families were being displaced because of the growth. It's wonderful. We're growing business and other things. but we're not taking these folks into consideration. Where are they
Right.
going to go? Where are they going to live? Now, talk a little bit about that, if you can, Philip, in terms of what we need to do better.
Well, West Dallas is the perfect place to look at what we have done badly and what we need to do better.
Right.
The history of West Dallas is that in Reconstruction, West Dallas was one of the few areas of town where the white power structure would let black people live. As black people were leaving agricultural situations and moving into cities, they were consciously excluded from most of the city, and West Dallas was considered this kind of lawless place where the city put no resources and allowed freedmen and their families to build structures out of whatever they could find. So of course, terrible quality construction. It became a slum, and then in the early 1900s, the white power structure, having created this problem, then created a solution for that problem, which was known as slum clearance, whereby they went in and just bulldozed all these people's houses. So from the very early times in Dallas, it has been a place of displacement, and those families were displaced. The area was backfilled with industrial uses, which were unregulated and very polluting in West Dallas. So we abused the land in addition to the people. And then as the African American community was displaced, the Latin American community came in and filled in, and West Dallas maintained some areas of historic African American residents, and then some other areas that are primarily Latin American. And that actually is one of the positive stories of West Dallas, because it has been a place over the last 50 years where there is a mixing of people of different backgrounds, which I think is almost always very healthy for a city. Right. But now, the white power structure has determined that they want to deploy economic development dollars over there for the benefit of some very well-connected developers. Yeah. And it has resulted in extraordinary pressure on the Latin American families that have been there for 50, 60 years now. And the way that pressure is exerting itself is in skyrocketing land values, which has resulted in high taxes on the people who own and increasing rents on the people who rent. And it's caused the city had inadvertently created another problem in that we passed some minimum housing standards, Chapter 27, and then the mayor's office coordinated with our code enforcement personnel to really, in my mind, abuse the people of West Dallas and the landlords in West Dallas. Code compliance was developed in the 20s, and it hasn't really evolved. It has always been a system that tries to secure compliance with a set of rules through punishment. In poor areas of town, most of the non-compliance is the result of lack of resources, and so applying a punishment that takes more resources out of the community is exactly the opposite thing that you need to do to ensure compliance. Yeah. If you're trying to create better housing for poor people, the right solution is to invest in better housing, not to punish the poor people or their landlords. So I think our system at City Hall of trying to achieve better quality housing for poor people is wrong-headed and frankly needs to be completely reworked. That's something I look forward to doing in my last term. I think we've seen that a collaborative approach from code compliance combined with money from the city, which is part of the Affordable Housing Comprehensive Plan, to stop displacement and to help people repair their homes so they can age in place, so that they can have stable living situations, which hopefully allows them to have stable working situations. I think those types of approaches, which are collaborative and seek to stop that displacement, are incredibly important for West Dallas, but we need to repeat that in South Dallas Fair Park. We need to repeat that in Forest Audelia. We unfortunately, because of the way we've managed the city of Dallas, we now have areas of extreme need in the north part of our city as well as in the southern part of our city and the western part of our city. So I think West Dallas has taught so many lessons, and particularly the story of Creche and the people who were going to be displaced by this wrong-headed enforcement effort managed by the mayor's office. I think that is one potential way forward. He has offered those tenants who were paying monthly rent the opportunity to actually purchase those properties, and many of them have taken advantage of that. Obviously, they could never qualify for a commercial bank loan, and so all the financing is seller financing. And as they are going along, both Creche and the buyers are now trying to improve the quality of the properties so that they are not only purchasing property, but they're purchasing property that is suitable for habitation.
Right. I had an opportunity actually early on with the SMU clinic. I'm a clinical professor at SMU. We were invited on to assist when the litigation was happening with respect to the displacement of these individuals. Of course, as you mentioned earlier, it seemed as though there was a concerted effort to kind of clear these folks out for the development. Real concern for a whole lot of folks, and the actual people, weren't really being represented. Creche actually kind of came in and said, okay, well, if you're going to do this, I can't afford to do anything else, so I'm just going to let everybody go and kind of wait for some of us, wait for the development, take advantage of what's going on. Not necessarily a bad thing. That's what you would do as a business person. However, it affected so many individuals, families that had been there, had been paying rent for 50, 60 years that you had mentioned. I of course, was really concerned about what the city had done. Not only this mayoral administration, but years before, in terms of what they anticipated. So we have to look long term, I think, in terms of how we're affecting people that are there. How have we changed, if at all, in the city, the way in which we forecast things? I know in the city of Dallas, just growing up here, in all honesty, my feeling has always been, I'm a product of the early 70s, and I knew where I shouldn't be. I knew where I couldn't go in. And, I'm not that old, but I'd hear it from my parents, my grandparents, and you're not supposed to go there, you're not supposed to go here. Incredibly divided city in a whole lot of ways, and that continues to this day. So what have we done policy-wise? Have there been any changes since the whole West Dallas thing came to light, and in terms of what it is we're doing or moving forward on with respect to having a transparency, an openness as to how we're affecting these communities long term, and what's next? What's the next West Dallas? Is it possible that this stuff could happen or pop up in a different area of our city?
Sure. I think there's a danger that the neighborhoods near Redbird could feel some gentrification pressure. They are, by and large, better maintained and better capitalized than some of the West Dallas neighborhoods were a few years ago when that investment went in there. So there was maybe a little less danger. But with what we have learned is we can't just go willy-nilly into these neighborhoods and try to encourage massive investment, inappropriate development, and not do something to support people staying in their neighborhoods and not being displaced. Or, the other thing the housing policy acknowledges is that there are neighborhoods, there are situations that people want to get out of. And we need to offer them that opportunity also, but in a way that supports them. If you're living in a house that's only worth $25,000, the fact that somebody pays you fair market value for that house and you go away, you have a big problem at that point because you can't afford to live anywhere else for that amount of money. So we just have to be much more sensitive to it. And I would say that the comprehensive housing policy explicitly makes this a policy of the city of Dallas. Now, you had an interesting point about people either explicitly being instructed by parents not to go to certain parts of town or not feeling comfortable in certain parts of town. The town is 42% Latino, like 23% African American. If I always say this to people, if you find yourself in a social situation or a business situation in the city of Dallas and the room is full of white people, there's a problem. You know, there, I think, I've said this several times on city council, I think my colleagues agree with me. The city of Dallas, from a housing standpoint, from an economic development standpoint, from a business standpoint, needs to be a place where everybody feels comfortable all over the place.
Yeah.
I was worried when we did Greenville Avenue that it would not feel comfortable to Black and Latino visitors. And I'm glad to say that I was wrong. Clyde Warren Park, many people thought that that would just be a park for rich white people, and that has not proven to be the case. And what we've learned is that when we invest in excellent public spaces, that people do feel comfortable to come and visit them and utilize them. Same deal with the Continental Bridge in West Dallas. I mean, I think that's become a real melting pot. And the more we do things like that to create public spaces where people do spend time together with people of other backgrounds, the more they're going to be willing to do that in other parts of their lives, I think. I hope that's right.
Yeah, but I no doubt agree with you. I think exposure to one another's culture or differences or whatever it may be, we just don't know each other. And I think when we have that opportunity to kind of get together and start realizing it, then we find more common ground. So we're going to take a quick break, a quick 2-minute break. You guys come back with us. We'll be rejoining our guest, Mr. Philip Kingston, in just 2 minutes. So let's make that happen.
The law offices of Eric Cedillo, a professional corporation, a firm that handles legal matters in personal injury, auto and truck accidents, wrongful death, on-the-job injuries, criminal felony and misdemeanor, family law, divorce, and child custody. The law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas, at 214-740-1628. That's 214-740-1628. Find them on the web at cedillolaw.com. That's cedillolaw.com.
Many times we don't understand the law. Law for the People with Eric Cedillo is here to inform, educate, and answer your legal questions. Thank you for tuning in today. From the law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas, Texas. Here's your host, Eric Cedillo.
Hey guys, thank you so much for rejoining us for Law for the People here, coming at you every Friday from 1 to 3. We're here with our special guest, Mr. Philip Kingston, who of course is running for City Council in District 14 here in Dallas, Texas. Philip, we were talking earlier about some of the issues that I think I kind of brought up in terms of were important to me, gentrification and other things. I want to talk about you in terms of what you've done since 2013, because you've been on the council, you've seen some changes, you've seen how the city has operated. What are some of the big highlights for you in terms of things that you've gotten accomplished or feel good about?
Well, it started with a bang.
Yeah.
My first month on council, the Yellow Cab and AC Gonzalez tried to kill Uber and Lyft.
Yeah.
Scott Griggs and I were able to organize enough public opposition to that to really stop it and to expose how extremely crooked it was. And so that was a trial by fire. That was, immediately upon getting to council, we had something that was really deeply crooked that we had to root out.
Yeah.
And that's been a theme of my service ever since then, is finding these things that either over time somebody has developed an inappropriate benefit from the public trust, or somebody is actually actively trying to corrupt things.
Tell us about that. Tell us a little bit about what that was in terms of, gosh, in 2019, us thinking about not having Uber or Lyft.
It's amazing, right?
But what was the deal with respect to that? Of course, the cab companies, I'm sure, had some say or some...
It was just straight up the cab companies didn't want the competition.
Right.
The cab companies were way too cozy with the existing council at that time.
Okay.
The level of political contributions they'd given to these people were extremely high.
Yeah.
And the city manager really sort of, without any advice from the council, sort of acted as though the policy of the city should be to shut down Uber and Lyft. Well, clearly the policy of the city should be the opposite.
Right.
We need to encourage innovative, disruptive companies. But it's, that disruptive word is the one that gets used against me all the time also. People who are benefiting from the status quo do not like change.
Right.
And that is a lesson I have learned over and over again,
Yeah.
sometimes very painfully. And that, like you had mentioned before, this is the story of the pension system. Very shortly after I was elected, I was appointed to the pension system. Scott Griggs had been on there for 2 years, raising the alarm that things over there were not as they seemed. Yeah. And when I got there, they second meeting, I think, they came up to me before the meeting and they said, would you be available to go take a trip to do some due diligence over our forestry assets? And I said, well, where are these forestry assets? And they said, well, one investment is outside of London and the other one is outside of Cape Town. And, this is just a straight-up bribery attempt, essentially. This is we're going to give you these fabulous trips in order to keep you from asking questions about what we're doing.
Yeah. What was the composition of that? What did that look like? Who were these folks? Who did they kind of...
The board back then had 4 members of the city council, 4 members of the fire service, and 4 members of the police department. Right. And at that time, all of the uniformed members of the board were very big fans of Richard Tediment, who turned out to be an absolute criminal. Yeah. And they were totally, they were bought off, essentially. They had been able to manipulate the pension system to increase their own benefits, to give themselves this drop program that guaranteed them an 8% return. Many of them had made themselves multimillionaires through doing this, and so I think people aren't aware that there was such naked corruption over there. And then these bad investments were Tediment's attempt to continue to fund these inappropriately rich benefits, and so it was just headed for disaster.
So just to kind of give the lay people kind of listening at home, they had control over the investments. They got the money from the pension, and they invested in certain areas, which we later, of course, found out that a lot of them were incredibly failing, lost a lot of money for the pension. It was really in serious trouble at the time. In addition to that, I think there was the setup itself. You had 8 members of, of course, the fire department, and as you had mentioned, police force, and 4 members of the city council on it. But there was certainly a way in which, at least lay people listening in, there was an almost automatic, you're going to receive this, regardless of what they're doing in terms of investment. We're going to promise you that. There were a number of police officers and firemen who, incredibly hardworking folks who deserve a whole lot, but a lot of them were becoming millionaires based on what they were guaranteed to receive, regardless of the investment monies and what they were doing. So it was kind of a situation where we were in some real perilous situation with respect to the city, because of course the city's behind or supporting of it, right?
So there's only 2 ways to lose money in a public pension. One is to pay benefits that are too rich, and the other is to not make enough money on your investments. And we decided to do both at the same time. So it was headed. So if your pension fails, your obligation to your retirees does not evaporate.
Right.
And it's important to remember that we're talking about a small group of police and firefighters who did bad things.
Right.
Most of the police and firefighters just did what we asked them to do. Right. And then we had to come back and cut their benefits in order to save the pension. Yeah. You want to talk about feeling bad? Yeah. Man, that was tough sledding. Yeah. So we have to save the pension. There was no plan that was realistic that would have shut down the pension, even though the mayor suggested that there was. It would have resulted in a municipal bankruptcy, the largest in the history of the United States. There is a section of the Bankruptcy Code, Chapter 9, that applies to municipalities. It doesn't work well. It tends to, in other places where it has been used, the police and firefighters or the public employees who are owed the obligation of a retirement tend to do better in the bankruptcy than the city's bondholders, and so the result tends to be that the city simply loses all of its credit and is unable to maintain its infrastructure. So there would have been no good outcome from that. Yeah. the result, the fix that we did was very painful for our active duty police and firefighters because it increased their biweekly contribution to the pension. So on take-home pay, they were taking home less pay. Yeah. That's one of the reasons we've been so adamant that they needed a raise. And then the city is kicking in another $41 million a year just straight out of the general fund. And so when people are upset about their property taxes, and I am too, I'm feeling it also. And I do apologize, and I try to explain to people that we want to be extremely conscious of not wasting their money. But one of the reasons we have not been able to truly cut taxes is because of that extra $41 million a year that we needed in order to save the pension and save the city from bankruptcy. Yeah. That doesn't make anybody feel good. That is not a feel-good story, but it's one where I think I can say to people with a straight face, we didn't have a choice.
Yeah. And let's talk about that, because things like this can kind of continue to happen unless we kind of shed light on why. How did we get there with the pension? What do you think were some of the things that maybe we learned about how it was set up and how it was allowed to operate?
Honestly, the state enabling legislation that allowed it to be an independently managed pension, it used to be under the control of City Hall. And police and fire, not just here, but in many places in the 70s and 80s, started advocating that they get to control their own retirement. Right. And in every situation where that has occurred, it has been as a result of the legislature allowing it. And so the enabling legislation set up the problem because it put management in the hands of people who didn't know anything about investing. Right. Anytime you see a pension that doesn't have a pretty healthy board membership of professional investors, you're looking at a pension that's at risk, because pensions are incredibly tricky. They make money on the margins. Yeah. They've got to make a consistent, reliable return over time, which is the hardest thing to do in investing. And then they've got to pay benefits in a way that very carefully shepherds the money that they have so that it doesn't shrink, so that it continues to grow. And that requires professional management. Richard Tediment had no qualifications for this job. And it requires oversight by people who are professional investors. And that's part of the fix that we put into place. Yeah. Is I got fired from the board, and I was never so excited to be fired from a job in my life. And I was replaced with somebody who's way smarter than I am about investing. And that's entirely appropriate. That respects the people's trust way more than what we had before.
Right. How did that resolve itself? Some sort of settlement, I would imagine, between the city and the pension fund itself, or how did that?
No, it was. Like? It is new state law. Okay. A very good guy named Dan Flynn from Van, Texas, sponsored the legislation in the House, and then Royce West, our great senator from Dallas, managed the companion piece in the Senate, and came up with this plan. It's not a great plan. It cut benefits. It raised the city of Dallas's investment in the pension, but it was the best we could do at the time. I'm committed, when we can find other sources of revenue, and I have a specific one in mind, I'm committed to increasing our investment in the pension so that it can provide better benefits. There's a group of people, it's declining, it's our oldest retirees who, because of the way their benefits looked when they retired, are living on $1,500 or less a month. Wow. And I don't think that's okay. Wow. To be in your 70s, probably with increasing medical care costs, and to be facing a budget like that, wow. I think I worry about those people. Yeah. And it would be great to be able to come back in and do a bigger recapitalization of both our uniformed and non-uniformed pension, get them much closer to full funding so that they can explore increasing benefits. Particularly, I would love to add back a cost of living adjustment, one that is tied to the CPI so it doesn't get too rich or anything like that, but something that allows people not to be worried that their income is essentially dwindling because of inflation.
How do we do that? How would we do that?
Sell the airports.
Okay.
The city cannot make money on airports. I don't think people understand that. Federal law requires you to keep all of the revenue you generate at an airport invested in the airport. So we don't make anything at DFW. We don't make anything at Love, except for an incredibly small amount of sales tax, which we would make anyway, no matter who owned it. I have gotten a back of the napkin estimate that if we sold all of our aviation assets, 7/11 of DFW Airport, 100% of Love Field, and then we would throw in Dallas Executive Airport as like a free gift with purchase. That we could potentially get as much as $6 billion out of that sale. That money cannot be used for maintenance and operations. We couldn't use that to pay police and firefighters. We could, but I think it'd be very irresponsible to sell an asset and then use it for your monthly expenses. That'd be like selling a house and using it for your monthly expenses. It's not prudent. But it would be very prudent to fully capitalize our pensions, get them in a situation where our monthly contribution to them from the city's general fund could be reduced, and then buy down our general obligation debt. The city spends over 28 cents of every dollar of revenue on debt service right now. If we get that number down into the single digits, the delta between those two debt service numbers is essentially a permanent increase in the city's general fund budget. And it could be as much as a couple $100 million. That's real money. That's money that could actually fund full maintenance of the streets at a zero degradation level. We haven't been able to find the money to keep the streets from further degrading. That's the kind of structural change in the city of Dallas's finances that could protect us from a downturn. If we have a drop-off in property tax collection or sales tax revenue due to a downturn in the economy, that delta between the two debt service numbers that we are facing could be the difference between laying off police and firefighters and continuing to provide good public service even if we have a recession.
Have you presented that? How popular is that idea of selling off the airport?
It scares the life out of people. People don't understand really what the airports are. The airports...
I didn't know that. I did not know that we could not maintain a profit aside from the sales tax. We really aren't making anything. And what is there an expenditure on behalf of the city for maintaining and everything else that we do, or are we actually flatline in terms of taking care of that part?
The airports are managed as an enterprise fund, meaning that all of the obligations and expenditures we face at the airports are funded by revenue that the airports generate. Right. So they are not a drag on the city's budget.
Zero.
There is no reason, there's no emergency that we should sell them to improve our finances, other than we have these opportunities to really structurally change the city's finances. I have presented this in many different situations. In Dallas, it's a pretty popular idea. And the idea that we could permanently reduce debt service, I think when people figure out that we've borrowed so much money, that that their taxes that are going up are only being used at about a 72% level, we want that other 28 cents back, right? That's very popular. I think people in Dallas see the vision. Our friends in Fort Worth hate the idea. They think I'm nuts. They've told me as much. Yeah. But what I say to them is the first rule of investing in business is never be a minority partner.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, Philip, let's talk about you in terms of what we've heard. Of course, the morning news kind of came out, for your opponent. A lot of the stuff that they charge against you is that you're stubborn or hard to work with. It's kind of what we repeatedly hear from some corners, some segments of the current folks running things. Tell us, is there any truth to it, one? And two, how do you feel about it?
Well, Eric, the issue is that it goes back to that when people are profiting from the status quo, they get very angry at people who demand change. And I demand a lot of change. Okay. So the idea that I'm the idea that the morning news is floating and that my opponent is echoing is that there are aspects of my personality that are preventing me from being effective. That's facially false. No member of council has more pieces of legislation passed. Well, I only have one vote on that 15-member council. Right. How did I do that? Right. You know? I think anybody who's objective about my record is going to look and see extreme effectiveness. Now, it is true that I'm very passionate about what I'm doing, and when I see people lying or doing wrong or opposing a really good policy such as paid sick leave, right, it frustrates me, and I do admit to that. But the idea that that has somehow had any negative effect on the district is absolutely bogus. And, you know, you can use your own ears. Each voter has his or her own judgment. You can listen to this this broadcast and decide if I sound like a horrible person who can't get stuff done. Yeah. I think an objective examination of my record kind of proves the opposite.
Okay. This is your last opportunity, your last term, term down after this. Any future plans? Continue going forward?
Yeah, I need the voters to agree with me that that's a good idea. Yeah. I don't get to just say what I want to do, but I've very much enjoyed. I've seen this as an evolutionary step in my practice of public advocacy. You know, I did campaigns and elections before I got my professional training. I worked for 15 years as a commercial litigator, you know, going into courtrooms and advocating in those places. But then I started to raise my level of participation in public advocacy for things like Greenville Avenue and other things like that. And then the council office has given me a really great platform to do public advocacy. And that is really how I have that's how I view myself professionally, is that I'm a professional public advocate. Okay. I'm pretty good at it, and there will be another opportunity in the future for me to use those skills to do something good. And that's really what I want people to understand about my thought process, is that I don't want this job to have the job, or to call myself the council member, or to go to rubber chicken dinners, or for any of that purpose. There are two kinds of people in this business: those that want to do something and those that want to be somebody. And the minute you start to want an office for the purpose of having the office, you're a want to be somebody type person. And the problem with that is you'll say or do anything to be somebody. So in order for politicians to keep their egos in check, I think it's really important for them to focus on what they want to accomplish. Yeah. So whatever office I run for in the future, rest assured that the reason I would want the job is to affect a specific kind of change. And I think that there are opportunities in the county government to really make some serious. We've had many very progressive county commissioners, yet for some reason the policies and the budgeting at the county don't reflect those values all the time. And that's an opportunity that I'm thinking about. I see the state as having absolutely abdicated its duty to regulate the oil and gas industry for the benefit of the environment. That's an opportunity in the future. And so it's not about what office do I want to get into. It's about what change can I effect based on my skill and my knowledge.
Really appreciate it, Philip. Thanks so much.
Enjoyed it a lot, Eric.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I did as well. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today. We've run out of time this afternoon. But once again, every Friday from 1 to 3, join us for Law for the People. I want to thank my guest, Mr. Philip Kingston, for coming in and speaking with us. And just really quickly, Election Day is...
Early voting is on right now, 8 to 5 every day this week, and it'll be 7 to 7 next week. Okay. And then Election Day is June the 8th. Do need your vote very much.
So Saturday, June the 8th is Election Day. But again, as Philip mentioned, this is the early voting period. Get out there and vote. It's incredibly important that we do so in the numbers that are reflective of who we are. Thank you once again, sir. And you guys have a wonderful afternoon.
The law offices of Eric Cedillo, a professional corporation, a firm that handles legal matters in personal injury, auto and truck accidents, wrongful death, on-the-job injuries, criminal felony and misdemeanor, family law, divorce, and child custody. The law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas at 214-740-1628. That's 214-740-1628. Find them on the web at cedillolaw.com. That's cedillolaw.com.